to the world. I mean, they have a GDP half the size of West Virginia's. And now they're cutting out their global trade. They just cut out a third of it, and that totals what they cut out, $1 billion. And what is Bill Gates worth? About 80-something billion.
Yeah.
And of course, North Korea has been a threat to the world. Look what they did, those North Koreans, lying right in front of our faces for everybody to hear that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. And look what the North Koreans did to obliterate, to destroy an entire nation of Iraq, kill over 1 million people. Oh, and those North Koreans, you know, after their leader won the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize, yeah, what he said was that, I'm going to send 33,000 more troops into Afghanistan. And then Gaddafi has to go. Then those North Koreans, look what they did to Libya. Look how they destroyed a sovereign nation that did nothing to anyone. And those North Koreans, Assad has to go, I says. So look what they've done. They slaughtered over 500,000 Syrians, those North Koreans. We got to watch them constantly. Now they're in Somalia. They're in Sudan. Oh, yeah. You know, of course, I'm talking about America.
Yeah.
North Korea has not done anything to anybody. The United States is dropping bombs on their border. Could you imagine if North Korea was dropping bombs and they had to deal with Canada, and they're dropping bombs on the Canadian-U.S. border, and over to off Newport News over there to the east, we got the Chinese doing massive maneuvers over at Newport News. And down in the Gulf of Mexico, we got the Russians. And over there in California, we got the Iranian fleet doing massive, quote, war games. How long would America tolerate that?
About 5
They'd
minutes.
be bombing the hell out of them. But the United States is doing this to every country that they don't like. And the prostitute little media, these little boys and girls, I have to be equal. They're nothing more than political whores. They get paid to put out. They get paid to put out propaganda, and that's one of the major stories in the Trends Journal, the propaganda that they're selling us. So now let's go back, Richie, to the Korean War. Started by the United States after they propped up a dictator in South Korea that was in bed with the Japanese, who, of course, you know, they had those wonderful women that they turned into slaves over there so they could have sex with the Japanese soldiers. You remember those, right?
Yeah.
We won't talk about that. The United States took that guy that was working with the Japanese and put him as the head of South Korea. The United States killed over 4 million North Koreans in the Korean War. The pilots used to radio back, there's nothing left to bomb. Look at the photos of North Korea. You see all new buildings. It's not like they just invented the joint, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
They destroyed everything. So now I am a believer in Second Amendment rights, the right to bear arms. That doesn't mean I'm going to use them. Why isn't North Korea allowed to bear arms, considering what they saw happen to Gaddafi and to Hussein when they didn't have nuclear weapons? Jack, you're dead. So here we are. Remember those old gunfights they used to show on TV, those old westerns, and the two guys are facing off each other, and their hands are ready to grab the guns, They had them strapped around their waist. Now, suppose we're watching one of those, and you and I are in the gunfight, and I say to you, hey, Richie, let's not draw, let's talk first. And you say, okay. And then I'd say to you, as I'm pointing my gun at you, but drop your gun, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
North Korea has been wanting to talk with Americans about peace forever. And all Americans keep saying is, we won't talk to you until you dismantle your defensive and offensive military systems. America is threatening North Korea with 300,000 troops on its borders. These massive, quote, war games. Oh, and look at the major media now. All these, again, these little prostitutes, these boys and girls that get paid to put out by their Washington Johns and their corporate whoremasters. How about Russia's having military drills, with Belarus?
Yes, that's right.
Major front page of the Financial Times today. But America has these massive drills off the shores and borders of North Korea, which are basically drills to attack the joint, and that doesn't make the news, or barely does.
Bases in
so
every
that's what
country.
I have to say about North Korea.
Bases in every country in the world, well, most countries in the world as well, surrounding Russia with military bases. How serious? I mean, we saw that test, and again, I'm not agreeing with you just for the sake of agreeing with you. I'd like to find a devil's advocate position to take against what you say to make it interesting for our listeners. It is interesting for our listeners, but I can't argue with you, Gerald. Of course I can't. So he's understandably doing weapons readiness tests for the eventuality that he's attacked. That's Kim Jong-un. If those tests continue and another long-range missile is tested a couple of thousand miles or a couple of thousand kilometers, how serious is that in terms of the possible response from the United States? Is Trump just playing to the gallery, talking about destroying people? Because we've heard from more sensible, I know you haven't, I know the media, it's probably only slightly better here than it is in America. It isn't really. But we've had a couple of, more sensible voices here today speaking on British news saying, look, it's silly by Trump. They're not going to bomb North Korea because they would be able to obliterate the South within a matter of minutes. So what is likely to be the Trump government's response in the event of another test?
What they just passed a new bill, $700 billion for the military. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's the military-industrial complex. And what we have now is we have the military running Americans' government. This is anathema to everything that this country was founded upon. Eisenhower would be turning in his grave, a 5-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, who warned that the military-industrial complex was robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, sweat of the laborers, and future of the children. And now it's happened. Who's running the White House? Mad Dog Mattis, McMaster, Kelly, 3 generals in top positions. As we wrote in this Trends Journal, Trump is merely back in military school. That's all it is. He's taking orders from the generals. Trump and I are the same age. I may have said this on your show before. The greatest threat when I was a kid, believe me, they couldn't control me. You little SOB, we had enough of this. You're going to military school. That was the great threat. Now here you are. You're a teenage boy. Grew up in the Bronx and Yonkers. What are you thinking of? Thinking of girls.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a car, and I'm thinking of sports. The last place my mother, may her soul rest in peace, a great Italian, woman. Italian women spoil their sons. I'm eating the finest food possible to be cooked. I'm going to go to military school? Trump was so narcissistic, they sent this rich little boy to military school, not far from us in Kingston over here, in Cornwall, New York, a little concentration camp. Now, here this guy, look at the pictures, Google it up, Trump in military school, dressed up in military drag, learning how to make his bed with the right corners and eating crappy food and saluting. Yeah, salute. I got a salute for you. You see that one? This is what this little boy is doing. And now Trump is back in military school, taking orders from the same guys that used to give it to him at New York Military Academy. And with the Goldman Sachs gang in charge as well.
And these are men, of course, they're neoconservative to the bone, Zionists.
No, they're not
to the bone.
neoconservatives. No, I'm sorry.
You don't think
sick
so?
SOBs.
Yeah.
They're psychopaths. They're little boys with bad attitudes that love to kill people and haven't had a victory to mark up. If I'm in business and I'm showing one failure after another, I'm not in business. But these arrogant guys with their bad attitudes and guns that they'll kill you with keep killing without one victory. Not one victory, but a lot of bad attitude, arrogance, and murder. Well, you said it all. I mean, the government's, look at the centerfold of the Trends Journal. It's done by Anthony Frieda. It's my concept, and Anthony Frieda, great illustrator's work. And here's a gift for your beloved family and friends who ignore the facts. And we have the presidential reality show, and then under it, who's your favorite freak? And we have all the freaks from all the political parties, the central bankers, and on and on. So all it is, you have freaks running your country. I mean, look, one freak after another you got over there. The same here. Go to Germany. Hey, you been in France lately? It's a freak show. People are letting freaks run and ruin their lives. I mean, look at them. How could anybody with a half a brain listen to them? So they're all little sellouts. They're nobodies that have never worked a day in their lives, been sucking off the public tit and telling you what to do. That's Brexit. They could care less about the people. I just told you that in the United States, they just voted for a $700 billion defense budget. And then when you put in the black ops and the CIA, all the other stuff, we're looking over $1 trillion. Well, now they just had hurricanes in Houston and Florida, and the homeowners are losing everything. They give them a couple of pennies. Where are the troops? You mentioned they're in over 800 bases overseas?
Yeah.
How come the troops aren't there rebuilding these homes? You know why? Because that's what they think of the Americans, just like your Mayo over there. Who's that other guy? Johnson with that funny hair. What's his name?
Boris Johnson.
Boris
yeah.
who?
Boris Johnson.
Boris
yeah.
Clown?
Yeah.
Boris Moron? Boris Imbecile? Boris, you little piece of crap nothing? How could anybody with a half a brain take orders from that little clown? And look what they do. Here comes the Queen, man. Roll out the red carpet, dress up all these little guys in their military drag, and salute every country. You look at Trump going out of the helicopter, saluting this little clown next to him. Yeah, I'll salute. I got one for you. Look what's going on. When are people going to have some courage? When are they going to stand up? Hey, look what they just had the Emmys. Oh, it was a big deal. Oh, it was all anti-Trump. Not one word for these little clowns over there in Hollywood, you little losing little pieces of garbage about peace. Nothing about the wars going on. All these we need more transgender bathrooms. Yeah, how about taking a leak in the street?
Absolutely right.
Nothing about peace. How could anybody that has a half a brain look up to a Boris clown or a Trump or a Clinton or an Obama or a Bush or a Penis Cheney? It's the people, man. I've had it. I'm so sick of writing down the facts anymore. It's a freak show, and everybody loves their freak.
Don't ever get tired of writing the journal, mate. I mean that. It's absolutely vital that there's some semblance of free media in the US and in the UK. We might have just we just lost you momentarily. Thanks for calling back there. I was making the point.
Everybody loves their freak. It's a freak show. And when are the people going to stand up? How many more facts do you need? How many more facts do people need that they're getting shafted? It's a multinational takeover. You're a slave for the multinationals. Taxes so the elite could live better. And the politicians. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
I understand. It might sound a bit patronizing, me saying to you, I understand your frustration, because I've not been alive to this for anywhere near as long as you have, and I certainly haven't been doing what you've been doing for nearly 4 decades or longer, telling people the truth. But I just wonder if there's just a tiny bit of optimism to be found in a couple of bad stories.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
The optimism, Richie, is that we have an opportunity to change it now that we've never had before, because it's such an obvious freak show. That's what I love about Trump. We got a freak now that's ahead of the freak show. You got freaks in the UK. You need a bigger freak than the two and than who you got running the joint? Nay, now again, Boris Karloff over there.
Yeah. It's the story I'm thinking of. A big story broke here today. The Electoral Commission, which is the watchdog for elections in the UK, has recommended that internet trolls who target politicians have their right to vote taken away from them. And another couple of very interesting stories like that. A couple of very well-known broadcasters have lost their jobs for giving an opinion, a pretty harmless opinion, on a couple of social issues. And we know that in this coming parliament, the UK government is going to try and crack down on what they call online extremism, which basically means, you know, anybody who disagrees with them. But in those stories, Gerald, I get a bit of optimism because, like you touched on there, they seem to know that they're not safe. They seem to know that something is coming for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting the way they're acting. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree 100%. They know it. Look, I've been there at a graduate school. I was the number 2 guy running the mayoral campaign in Yonkers, New York. I mean, this is a city of 300,000 people. I was the assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate. I was the chief government affairs specialist for a major portion of the chemical industry in D.C. I know I got pictures of me and Ronald Reagan, John Connolly. I met with General Anthony Zinni. I met with Major, your clown over there. I've been with princes. I've been around. They're nobodies. They're regular people. And when people stop, that's why they put on all of these shows. Like you got this little Catson Macron over there in France, at Versailles, putting on all these sideshows so that people get taken in with the theatrics. There's nothing there. It's an old man behind a curtain with a dog. It's the Wizard of Oz. And what's happening now, Catalonia, that's a big one to watch.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
They're threatening the people to have a vote. They're going to bring in the truth. What, didn't the Spanish overthrow the joint? And now the people want it back? You know, it wasn't always part of Spain. A fascist overtook it. Oh, he was the king. Yeah, here comes the king. You know, so what I'm saying is, Richie, the opportunities now have never been better.
Never better. Just we've got about 5 minutes left on this, and knowing you probably have plenty more media appearances to do today. But in this quarter's edition of the Journal, which I got yesterday, I've been flicking through it. I'll read it thoroughly over the next couple of days, as I always do, and I'll make reference to some of it in future programs. Go to trendsresearch.com, folks. Subscribe to the Journal. I don't endorse anything really on this program. I endorse it because it's brilliant. I've been reading it for years. GERALD CELENTE is our guest. Just to talk about, you know, you're talking a lot about propaganda, and I saw an amazing article written by an independent journalist the other day about how the elites and about how the media are trying to basically crack down on our right to cause offence as a means to starting a public debate on anything, Gerald. You know, so you might have an opinion about an Irish broadcaster was fired recently because after he said, Gerald, that a young girl who was raped didn't deserve it, didn't ask for it, didn't do anything wrong, she didn't deserve it at all, and the bastard should go to prison for years. He then said, but the girl was comatose on the floor of a bathroom because she got so drunk she couldn't stand up. And he asked the question, do we need to have a conversation about personal responsibility? So the feminazis and the Irish media said that he was victim blaming and basically have had him thrown out of his job. It's a massive story in Ireland. It's localised, but it has implications for broadcasters and writers the world over. And there's been quite a number of stories like this recently where somebody has said something harmless to start a conversation and yet they were shut down very quickly. You mentioned the trans issue. We've had that over here where broadcasters who are against, you know, people using bathrooms other than the gender with which they were assigned, which is a fair point of view and everybody's entitled to their opinion, they've been threatened as well. It's kind of tyrannical. I know you've spoken a lot about this. What do you think?
Well, again, think of what the things you're talking about. All these, identity issues. Nothing about the major issues. Nothing about war. Nothing about peace. Nothing about freedom. Nothing about enlightenment. So that's what they're doing. As I mentioned, you had these moronic Emmys.
Yeah.
All it was a hate Trump show. And all these little clowns, these little nothing boys and girls, not a man or woman among them, not one word about, oh, we're in Afghanistan now for how many years and they're sending more troops? Oh, we just had 9/11, totally out of the news. Oh, the United States is slaughtering people in how many nations? So now we're talking about these identity issues. And that's what they're doing, Richie. And that's why people that are tuning into the mainstream media, if you like to masturbate, don't do it in public, because that's what you're doing when you're turning on the mainstream media. You're just part of the circle jerk.
Well, not completely, and not necessarily at all, Rory. Maybe to just clear up some conceptions, the Treasury Secretary, in theory, serves at the pleasure of the President of the United States, who appoints him as a cabinet minister. But to be completely honest with you, I quite wonder about the sincerity of whether the President truly gets to pick his Treasury Secretary at all. And in terms of lines of reporting, I don't really know who or what the Treasury Secretary reports to, other than to surmise that it very likely is the deep state or the globalist entity, as we refer to it as, or somebody who represents them. Because what the Exchange Stabilization Fund really is, in my view anyway, and what my research shows, it's really a black hole where dark money resides, and it's used as a catch-all to enact globalist policy and to primarily, as its mission statement when it was created, states it is to support and perpetuate the primacy of the U.S. dollar in global markets. And so to bring this up to modern times, there's no doubt in my mind that in practice what the Exchange Stabilization Fund is used for, it's the horsepower that is used to suppress precious metals prices. It is the horsepower or the catch-all that provides endless bids for U.S. government debt, which is falsely characterized as the U.S. debt markets having such resounding liquidity and depth, when in fact it's really not much more than a cheap parlor trick where you've got a whole bunch of dark money that's not even acknowledged to exist, and this pool of dark funds, which in my belief is numbers into the many trillions, is used to backstop everything from U.S. government bond auctions and to sopping up the liquidations of America's traditional financiers when they dump U.S. debt, supposedly and ostensibly to teach America lessons when America's behaving on the world stage in ways that is not becoming to world powers. They threaten, and we see the idle threats often, even in the mainstream media. We hear things like, well, China could really cause trouble for America by liquidating their U.S. government debt, because they are I think currently they're the largest holder of U.S. government debt, and typically it's a toss-up between them and Japan and often Saudi Arabia as to who the largest holder of U.S. government debt is. But let's just say anytime foreigners want to sell U.S. government debt, there's always a bid, and if anything, I've noticed in the last 5-7 years, when foreigners have sold U.S. government debt with conviction, we've actually seen the 10-year bond rally. So, when your biggest financiers are dumping your debt, and your debt rallies, and other countries are not visibly picking it up, you start to think about that. Where's the debt gone? Who bought the debt? And why is nobody else's foreign exchange or foreign reserve account burgeoning with this liquidated debt? And the reality is, sadly, is this debt is being bought and it's being memory hold by the Exchange Stabilization Fund. It's being bought with dark dollars, and then those bonds are being retired to the black hole, the same place where the money that came to purchase them came from. And this also, Rory, by extension, goes a long way to explain why the U.S. government has never had a failed bond auction. I can tell you that I worked in the institutional markets, in the debt markets in the 80s and the early 90s, and I can tell you that Western countries, major Western countries like Germany, France, Italy, they've all had failed bond auctions in the past. And the only country that comes to mind that's never had a failed bond auction, at least for public consumption, is America. And I would contend to you that the reason that America's never had a failed bond auction is because the heft of the Exchange Stabilization Fund is always standing in the background, willing and ready to do its job, to stand in and sop up the excess supply of U.S. government debt to maintain the illusion in world markets that the dollar is worthy of the mantle of being the world's reserve currency and basically infallible. And the notion that America's never had a failed bond auction starts to make me think in conspiratorial terms, in that, I think of sports analogies, and I think in terms of baseball, and I think in terms of people who go up to bat in Major League Baseball, and there aren't many batters, who bat 1,000. As a matter of fact, there's never been a batter who's batted 1,000. But America, with their bond auctions, do sport a 1,000 batting average, and no other country on the planet can actually make that claim. Only America. So, that's maybe a little bit to digest, but there you go.
Well, that would explain a lot. I mean, as far as the dollar.
Well, without splitting hairs, we're not necessarily exactly saying that the supply is endless, although it very well may be. But what we are saying is that the amount of dollars that are in fact in existence is very likely, at least in my view, extremely larger than the amount that is believed to be in existence. And what this does is it gives the Exchange Stabilization Fund a whole lot of wiggle room, because it has an absolutely almost unthinkable amount of resources it can bring to bear to make things appear other than they should. And for people who might scoff at the notion that any entity could possess such a crazy amount of money that I refer to as dark money, all we have to do is think about the undocumented, let's call it the undocumented waste of money by the U.S. government in recent years, which is purported to be, this is something Catherine Fitz talks a lot about, money that's missing from the U.S. government that they can't account for, and they cannot document where it's gone. And she comes up with numbers, and she's an extremely highly credible person who's been in government and who has uncovered massive fraud in her own right. But amounts that are alleged to be or admitted to be undocumentedly missing amount to, I think, 18 or 19 trillion. So we're talking about an amount of money that is accepted to be missing or unaccounted for that amounts to virtually the entirety of the U.S. government federal debt.
What volume that the amount of global debt has been underestimated by 14 trillion. How do you miss $14 trillion? You don't.
Well, I find it humorous because these are the very institutions that tell us they're going to bring stability,
Right.
that ensure us that the path they're on geopolitically is a sound course, and that all will be well. I mean, geez, Rory, we're talking about 14 trillion here, 18 or 19 trillion there. Pretty soon we're talking about real money.
Yeah. I mean, what could humanity do with, we'll say, $32 trillion? What could humanity? I mean, everybody on the planet.
Well, I'll give you an idea. I'll give you a couple things that humanity could do with $32 trillion. They could effect regime change in probably 7 or 8 countries over the last 6 or 7 years. They could suppress the price of precious metals and have their nominal values nailed to the floor, and and they could probably make the most indebted country with more debt out than any other entity ever on the planet. They could probably make that debt market look like it's strong, vital, and very liquid.
Latest one was Christian coming out and saying that physical gold will be priced higher by 2020, no later than 2020, and it'll be on an annual average basis north of 1,700, while at the same time he's saying that gold price suppression manipulation is nonsense. And on this, so I mean, what is up with this string of events?
No, but Rory, you forgot the punchline. No sooner had Mr. Sewermouth himself, Jeffrey Christian, made the comment that gold price suppression was ridiculous and doesn't occur, and people who espouse such are fools. Then, literally before the ink's dry on that statement, the ex-gold trader from Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, is arrested while vacationing in America for gold price suppression.
Yeah, we can't forget that.
I mean, Mr. Jeffrey Christian, we really need to get him a red nose, a polka dot suit, and some big shoes, because if we're going to listen to his diatribes, we need to dress him appropriately before we treat ourselves to the absolute sewage that flows from his mouth.
I mean, what do you think about that in light of him saying that physical gold is going to go higher? It's going to be higher. And
when Mr. Christian says that gold's going to go higher, it seems to me to rhyme with or echo the words of another one of my favorite and one of the best dressed and best looking gold commentators in the world, Mr. Jim Rickards. And Mr. Rickards, who I call Mr. Globalist himself, he does a very good job at giving us commentary on the gold market, where he always seems to have interspersed with his disinformation kernels of truth. Because but I will give him one thing I will say for Rickards is he will actually discuss or talk or allow to be mentioned the Exchange Stabilization Fund, but in doing so, he errantly makes the claim that the Exchange Stabilization Fund is transparent And he claims that the Exchange Stabilization Fund publishes annual financials, and he claims that the Exchange Stabilization Fund has a very, very finite and known amount of resources at its disposal. And to respond to those errant claims and completely false claims of Mr. Rickards, disingenuous claims, I would recommend all of your listeners to go to a website called marketskeptics.com. Look in the right-hand column. This is a site that was set up years ago by a researcher and a tremendous brain by the name of Eric D. Carbonell. And I want you to look in the right-hand column of his homepage of marketskeptics.com, and I want you to look for a heading that says something that I've been afraid to blog about. And click on the link on the right-hand side of the homepage, and it will take you to a 5-part tutorial, a YouTube tutorial on the Exchange Stabilization Fund, its roots, why it was set up, and what it does, and the relationship between the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the Federal Reserve, in that the Exchange Stabilization Fund was created by an act of Congress in 1934. When it was set up, it was seeded with about $3 billion in 1934 money. And that money was a windfall that was created after the U.S. government confiscated gold from citizens and made citizens turn in their gold for $20 an ounce. It was 6 months later, the gold was revalued up to $35 an ounce, creating a windfall of roughly $3 billion. And that $3 billion in 1934 dollars was used to seed the ESF, or the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And that overnight created the world's most powerful financial entity, the ESF. And that money that it was seeded with has been growing in perpetuity, without not subject to taxation or oversight. And Mr. de Carbonell's expose on the Exchange Stabilization Fund points out that much of the activity that the U.S. government is involved with around the world, it's all at the hands of, or at the direction of, or typically at the direction of the Exchange Stabilization Fund. But the ESF uses U.S. government agencies like the CIA, like the intelligence community, to carry out their actions, whether it's regime change, gun running, you name it. And on the financial end, the relationship is the ESF acts as principal, and the broker, their exclusive broker, is the trading desk of the New York Federal Reserve. And when the ESF has something to do in the financial markets, like suppressing the price of gold, the orders are sent from the ESF to the New York Fed. The New York Fed then disseminates those orders to the commercial banks, their magnificent 5 in America, which are J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. And these just happen to be the entities in America that have one time or another sported derivatives books in notional anywhere from, say, $50 up to $85 trillion. And coincidentally and interestingly, these banks in the last 20 years have seemingly never experienced a loss in their derivatives book. So if you want to think about 5 banks, 20 years, 4 quarters a year, and none of them have never had a really reported a loss from derivatives operations. And here again, we're getting back into the notion that we have people on a team, or players on teams that are batting 1,000. And let me tell you, as a person who's come from the institutional universe and dealt with trading desks at banks for many, many, many years, including back in the 80s and the early 90s, my biggest client was Citibank Canada Toronto, who at the time was the biggest derivatives book in the world, and served as the clearinghouse for Citibank worldwide, because a lot of the derivatives that get traded today were actually invented here in Canada, or incubated here. and for reasons that we don't need to get into today. But there's good history behind that too, and it's a great story. But let me assure you that trading desks do not bat 1,000 in quarter over quarter over quarter over quarter, and extrapolate that out to 20 years. When you trade and take risk, you have bad runs. Anybody who gambles knows that you don't win every time. If you take a coin and you flip it 4 times a year, and then you do that for 20 years, the odds of you getting that right every time are not good. Any gambler, even any drunk gambler, knows that. What it really comes to, it's the same. Look, another analogy. No angler goes out and catches a record tuna every time out on the water. But I mean, J.P. Morgan does. That's all there is to it. These institutions do, and the reason that they are so successful at fishing is because they fish in a bowl with a dip net. And when you fish in a bowl with a dip net, when you're dealing with predetermined outcomes and you have big fancy positions built around a predetermined outcome, it's very easy to win every time. And you see, this is the holographic nature of our capital markets. It's the true holographic nature of our capital markets, where crony capitalism is practiced to the nth degree, and where agents who serve the deep state or the globalist entity, are basically guaranteed wins every time. And this, of course, also lends credence or puts wind in the sails notionally to the idea that, J.P. Morgan, how many billions of dollars have they paid for fraudulent practices in the last, 5-7 years? I mean, I know that the fines that they've paid amounts to tens of billions.
Yes.
And yet, the namesake, Mr. Diamond, last week came out and made a pronouncement that Bitcoin was a fraud. Well, Mr. Diamond, how many billions of dollars has J.P. Morgan paid under your leadership for just that?
For fraud?
Anyway, I mean, what it really amounts to, Rory, you can't make this stuff up.
No. Unfortunately.
And I mean, that can take us off on another jag about cryptocurrencies. And
because Diamond, Zero Hedge reported the very next day after he made this statement that J.P. Morgan in Europe was purchasing Bitcoin.
Well, but he had said the day before he was going to fire any of his traders caught trading it. So, I mean, isn't it ironic that as Mr. Diamond was stating that Bitcoin was a fraud, he in the same breath stated that his daughter had traded Bitcoin and made money.
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
come on.
Anyway, what I find sort of ironic or humorous about this, and maybe possibly even in a gallows type of way, is while Mr. Diamond says that Bitcoin is a fraud, out of one side of his mouth, is his bank stock and trade is the fiat US dollar, and he claims that Bitcoin is a fraud, I guess ostensibly because Bitcoin is backed by nothing, but the US fiat dollar is also backed by nothing. And frankly, between me and you, Rory, I think we have a better handle on how many Bitcoins there are in existence than we do US dollars, because we have dark pools of US dollars that are not even acknowledged to exist, as in namely the dollars that are sunk in this black hole called the Exchange Stabilization Fund.
Well, and we just identified a minimum of 32 trillion that the IMF and the GAO can't find. The Government Accounting Office, or the General Accounting Office of the United States, can't find 18 trillion. IMF suddenly discovers this rounding error of 14 trillion. I mean,
you know, and the other thing that Mr. Diamond, the other thing, Rory, that Mr. Diamond has to be well aware of, his former highly decorated employee, Blythe Masters, when questioned about the rigging of precious metals markets and the naked shorts that J.P. Morgan had on their books in terms of futures contracts, it was none other than Blythe Masters that said, "Well, we don't take positions of our own. We only take positions for clients."
Right.
And so Mr. Diamond would be well aware that the true other side of their precious metal shorts are none other than the U.S. government. So, you know, for Mr. Diamond to be speaking about frauds is really quite a mouthful, given the activities that his bank is engaged with as an agent for the U.S. government, engaged in market rigging and creating predetermined outcomes all over our capital markets. And this occurs not just in the precious metals area; it occurs in the interest rate arena. It occurs in the fixed income arena, and J.P. Morgan is knee deep in this and front and center with all that's going on. It's
incredible. I mean, and you've got two criminals out here saying that, you know, like you were just pointing out, Jamie Dimon saying, you know, we've got fraud over here in Bitcoin, and a few days before that, Jeff Christian saying there's no market manipulation. I mean, the hits just keep coming. It's mind-boggling that these people can sleep at night when they say these things and know the truth of the matter. But that's how criminals, that's how they live their lives. So,
and just to spend a couple minutes now that we've brought up the name Bitcoin or the term Bitcoin, and a lot of people, I think, maybe mistakenly or misguidedly, think that Bitcoin is cryptocurrency or represents all of what cryptocurrency is or stands for. And I've been speaking about cryptocurrencies in recent interviews, and unfortunately, I've had a couple of misguided meatheads take my commentary regarding cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin off the mark, and I've had them accuse me of possibly pumping Bitcoin, which I can assure you that I'm absolutely not pumping Bitcoin. But what I've been trying to put across is the inherent value that is contained within the underlying technology that gives Bitcoin its sustenance, and that is blockchain technology. And what blockchain technology represents is a very efficient, transparent, low-cost method of transmitting ownership of things on a peer-to-peer basis. And, you know, so when I say things, the things being transmitted may very well be Bitcoin, a currency which is backed by nothing tangible, or it could also mean the transmission of tangible goods, be it precious metals, or be it property, as in real estate, or be it intellectual property, which is something a little bit abstract too. And what Bitcoin or the underlying technology of Bitcoin, and that's the blockchain, what the blockchain does is it removes the requirement for a third party or an intermediary to transfer ownership of something from one place to another.
So to give a real world example, today, if you want to shift a currency unit from New York to Melbourne, Australia, you need to go to the bank. You need to give the bank the details of where you want to send the money. Then you're going to probably have to fill out 3 or 4 pages of anti-money laundering dictates, all thoughtfully contrived by Homeland Security to help keep us all safe from people who live in caves and who wear togas. And then 3 days later, if you're lucky, the recipient in Melbourne, Australia may receive money, or maybe it'll take 6 or 7 days. Or on a blockchain system, you could do the same transaction within seconds or a minute. So you see, and there'd be no question, there would be no opportunity for anyone to steal the money in process. There'd be no possible way that a third party could say, oh well, it got lost in the mail, or we're going to have to examine. You filled out one of the forms the wrong way, and therefore it's going to have to be held for another week. Anyway, all I'm saying, it's very efficient. It's peer to peer, and it happens almost instantaneously. And what it does is it removes the possibility of swindle or fraud, or somebody, or something like in the case of precious metals, it would remove the possibility of a third party, like an exchange, from selling your metal twice. Or in the case of COMEX, maybe selling every ounce that they have in their vault, maybe selling it 500 times.
Maybe more.
So this is what blockchain technology, if, as, and when it gets married to tangibles like precious metal, this is what it will prevent. And what I see this displacing, very possibly, in the relatively near future, would be an instance where you have a hedge fund that wants exposure to physical precious metal. And currently today, if you're watching the people who run these hedge funds, if you see them being interviewed on the likes in Canada of Business News Network, or in America on CNBC, and you'll see hedge fund manager A being interviewed by the talking head of the day, and they're asked if they like precious metal. Maybe one time in 10,000 they say they like metal, and they say, so how would you like to gain exposure? And maybe one times in a million they'll say, I'd like to hold physical metal. And then they'd say, and what would be your chosen method to do that? And they would say, typically, well, through one of the ETFs like GLD or SLV. And you see, these things have been sold to the investment community as being true proxies and to truly represent physical precious metal.
Which they don't. They're frauds.
But in my view, these things are fraudulent. And in my view, there will come a day when people who hold them will realize when the almighty crap does hit the fan, they're going to find out that the physical that they thought they held in the form of these ETFs truly wasn't physical at all. And it's my belief that marrying physical precious metal to the blockchain would prevent this, because, like, with regard to said ETFs, all you need to do is go look at the prospectus for either of those entities I just referenced, and you look at the language in the prospectus regarding custody and where the metal is held and who holds it and who's responsible should the metal go missing. And the language is ambiguous as all get out.
Yeah, and it says that it's not audited if it's held by one of their agents.
Because look, listen, all I'm saying to you, there's no reason for the language to be as ambiguous as it is.
And, the real thing is, if the metal was actually put on the blockchain in the form of a smart contract, all this ambiguity would go away. But then so would the possibility of effectively selling metal more than once. And I mean, this anyway. You see, there's a reason why there are cliches in the world, Rory, where people say if something walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and swims like a duck, it's a duck. And these ETFs, they look like frauds, they smell like frauds, and which leads me to the conclusion that these things are likely frauds. So
I agree.
That's just the way the ball rolls, so to speak.
I want to change gears a little bit, Rob, because you brought up something that is very important when you're talking about transferring money from the United States to Australia. That money, if you use a bank, or that currency, I should say, that currency passes through the SWIFT system. And the United States used that system against Iran as a financial weapon. They've just recently, the United States threatened China with this same financial weapon. And China and Russia, independently and collectively, have their own alternatives to the SWIFT system. They have all the infrastructure built to bypass the Federal Reserve note and the world reserve currency, and they can operate completely outside of any Western banking system. And why would they do that? First of all, how stupid is that, to threaten your number one creditor? And second, how does that fit with what's happening with the multipolar world that we're moving to, and moving away from this Federal Reserve note hegemony that we have? I mean, what's going on with that?
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. If let's just say if American interests, or if globalist interests were very in tune or aware with possibly the notion that China was about to abandon the SWIFT system, might they not want to trump up the pretense that they're going to throw them out of the SWIFT system? I mean, if somebody knows they're going to get fired, would they be inclined, more inclined or less inclined to quit?
It's an excellent analogy.
If you know you're going to get fired tomorrow, would you be more or less inclined to quit tonight?
Be more inclined.
Wouldn't you think so? So, if the system knows that it's going down, and if the system knows that China is going to abandon the system, might the system want to trump up the idea, no pun intended, but might the system want to trump up the idea that they were going to throw China out of the system? And then they could blame China for the system's demise by inventing the excuse that they were not being agreeable, or they weren't working with us to defeat the scourge, the North Korean scourge, and they were determined to trade with them, and we were left with no other choice but to throw them out. But they were going to leave tomorrow anyway. So I ask you that question, and I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but it wouldn't surprise me if it turned out to be the case.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. Nothing would surprise me at this point, especially with our monetary system and global economics. It's such a mess at this point. I mean, you had Trump on TV, or not on TV, but he was at the United Nations, and I stopped listening after he was telling the world, that he just gave the military a huge raise, and that it's going to be the strongest military in the world. Even stronger. We can kill more people now than ever before. While at the same time, this is in with the backdrop of what we were just talking about, along with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative, the North-South Corridor, the Eurasian Economic Union, the BRICS Consortium, all of these multipolar world systems coming to fruition. They are being built out right now. All of the infrastructure to support these alliances is already in place. They just have to go to work and build the rail system, the water system, and the solar system, and whatever it is that needs to be built. But all of the supporting infrastructure, all the monetary supporting infrastructure is already in place. Why would this globalist do this?
Well, it's I think very likely it goes back to what we were just discussing. Maybe before somebody, just to phrase it a slightly different way, when you know somebody's going to quit, you say you're fired. I mean, is that something Donald Trump would do?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, look, I'm not trying to pile on to Trump, but all I'm saying is the world financial edifice, which I believe is a complete hologram relative to what we're told versus what reality is, and many commentators have been piling on, saying that we're due for some very, very serious problems. And the can has been kicked down the road, and we've run out of road, and we're at the end of the road. And many market forecasters have been saying that this is really imminent, and it's coming soon. And could these be the entrails or the signposts of a big reset, which is in some